The AFC South is expected to be one of the worst divisions in football, but should it be? I know that the Jaguars are expected to be one of the better teams, but the Titans, Colts, and Texans all expected to not have the best seasons this year. But I'm not so sure if that's the case, and today I'm going to be discussing the AFC South with my good friend Dan Alexander. For starters, Dan, thank you for taking the time to take a break from betting on lacrosse to talk some football with me. What's going on, Dan? How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing absolutely terrific. Love what you guys are doing with GoldSheet TV. So yeah, we get to turn our eye to a sport where I'm begging people to and watch. The one that we need to remind people to make sure you don't overextend your bankroll in. So quite two different sports that we're getting into here. But I couldn't be more more pumped to talk a little AFC South with you,
man. Very excited. Before we hop right in, I want to remind everybody that GoldSheet, all three of our football products, the GoldSheet, Confidential Kickoff, and Extra, are now one product, and that is at one low price, $149 until July 16th. And there's going to be a little bit of a price hike because this is an early bird price. And also all of the LTS GoldSheet picks that we had on the website last year are now over at WagerTalk.com. So keep a reminder that the LTS picks that were on GoldSheet, same exact service, just now hosted at WagerTalk.com. But Dan, let's get right into it. So the Jacksonville Jaguars come into last season, obviously, with a new head coach with Super Bowl pedigree, as I'm sure you're well aware as an Eagles fan. Trevor Lawrence finally takes that step forward. And now, after winning the division and also winning a playoff game at home in a remarkable comeback, the Jaguars are now minus 165 chalk at DraftKings to win the AFC South. I'm going to start with the general question, Dan. Do the Jaguars deserve to be minus 165 favorites to win a division in this upcoming season?
I mean, I would feel a little bit better if that number was more like minus 125, something like that. Sounds a little more correct to me than minus 160, 165, and moving upwards. And I get it. A lot of that, I think, has less to do with maybe the outlook on the Jaguars and more to do with the outlook on the rest of this division. As you said, Trevor Lawrence finally took that step forward, and it had a lot to do with the fact that you had a head coach in Doug Peterson who was even able to make Carson Wentz look like an MVP candidate at times. So that tells you everything you need to know about what the boon that Peterson's able to bring as far as a passing perspective goes. However, you're looking at a Jaguars team that hasn't won back-to-back division titles since before the AFC South was even a thing. So, I think I've got to pump the brakes here a little bit because we know injury going to be the ultimate equalizer. You never know what's going to happen come training camp. You never know if one of these other teams, we're going to get into some of these other teams in the division, but who knows? One of these quarterbacks comes in, puts a stamp on the division and makes it at least a little bit more competitive. I'm not sure if we see as many free chalk wins that we have in the AFC South, which is why 165, that's definitely not going to be added to my portfolio to answer your question, a little more directly. I think that's a little bit rich for my taste when you look at a team who has a little bit of a tougher schedule as far as, having a first place versus a fourth place schedule.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. 165, I think, is actually ridiculous, right? Like, I would definitely not lay that with this team. And a little bit of perspective around it. You can actually somewhat consider this coming season to be Trevor Lawrence's sophomore year, considering the first year of Meyer is basically a complete wash. And a lot of quarterbacks do take a major leap up from that, from year one to year two. That's really where you see the biggest progressions from those players who end up becoming elite style players. So the best of Trevor Lawrence might still definitely be yet to be seen, which is, obviously very exciting for Jaguars fans. But I think you made a great point by saying, while this division seems to be the biggest pushover division in the NFL, I'm not so sure that the Titans, Colts, and sorry, producer Rob, the Texans might be, but I'm not sure those other two teams are going to be as big of pushover squads as advertised right now. And another big concern that I have with Jacksonville is their offensive line was decent last year, but now they lost Jawan Taylor, who went to the Chiefs, which I think was one of the better signings this offseason. Their starting left tackle, Cam Robinson, is going to miss the first 4 games due to a PED suspension. So they're going to be relying on 2 rookie tackles or Walker Little, a sophomore who only played 20 snaps last year, is going to be a starting right tackle. Then you're going to have somebody fill in for 4 games for Cam Robinson. So I guess one of my biggest concerns for Jacksonville now is going to be their offensive line and also their secondary. Dan, what concerns do you simply have for this team just in general?
Yeah, I completely agree, and especially we'll see, does that offensive line come along a little bit here as the season continues? Once you have that continuity, are they able to assuage, maybe some of the issues that they have coming in, knowing, all right, here's one of our weak sides, now we'll scheme our offense around it. So that's definitely one coming out, but I'm glad you mentioned the secondary, because while they have some players there, not much depth that you're looking at, especially when you're talking about cornerbacks. So we talked about injuries being that ultimate equalizer. One of them goes down, you're starting to reel and maybe having to look into, hey, do we have to do a trade here, depending on where they're at during the season? So I think the depth is something that worries me. And that's also something that worries me for this wide receiving core. You go out, you get a Calvin Ridley. So hopefully, as long as he stays off of his DraftKings account, you'll have him for the full season if he stays healthy. But, you also spent a lot of money on bringing Christian Kirk in. However, I think one thing that might go under the radar, a guy who I'm going to be targeting, is just a little preview here, week in and week out, especially to begin, is I think while those other receivers try and find their place, Evan Ingram might be good for some receptions over early in the season, just because there is some continuity there. And you see that being a focal point of Doug Peterson offenses, is getting the ball towards your tight end. So as far as concerns, it's going to just be depth on some of these big time playmaking positions. But as far as, something that maybe you could eye going in, I think Evan Ingram might be having a decent season this year.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, especially considering they used the franchise tag on Ingram to make sure he, wasn't leaving. He's definitely more of a receiver-style tight end. And I think, again, the point you made on the secondary, right? Like, the Jaguars drafted a couple of cornerbacks in this year's draft, but not until, later in the draft. So they would be obviously expecting a little bit too much from these guys. The last point I want to make on Jacksonville, because I think we've had touched upon a lot of important things, but just as more just a general statement about the NFL, and Jacksonville could be, not going to say like an out. Trevor Lawrence could be good enough and elite enough to make Jacksonville become this elite team. But going from bad to good and good to great in the NFL is a completely different kind of situation.
Yeah.
Going from 4 to 9 wins, a lot of teams can go from 4 wins to 9 wins. A lot of one-score game differentials or turnover expectancy or maybe luck factors that could turn a 4-win team into a 9-win team. But going from a 9-win team to a 10, 11, 12-win team, that obviously a lot of it is shouldered on the quarterback. A lot of things need to go right for your team during that season in terms of injury luck, turnovers, and just elite play under center. So seeing a win total of early it came out around like 10, 10.5. That's something that you would definitely go. I would definitely bet the under on at like 9.5. A little bit different. I think that's more fairly priced. But just a general note for these teams is it's very difficult to go from being a 7-8, 8-8, 9-8 team, even 10-8, to then being a 11, 12, 13-win team. You really need an elite quarterback there, an elite head coach, and just an overall very good roster. That the Jaguars, don't get me wrong, have a good roster, but are they great?
Yeah,
that's a very different question. But moving on to a very interesting team, and this is a team I have a lot of thoughts on, but I would love to pass it to you first. The Indianapolis Colts. They go out, they select Anthony Richardson, the dynamic threat from Florida, who we know is one of the best athletes probably in the NFL at this point. Whether he can throw the football will remain to be seen. We'll have to obviously scratch that. They hired Shane Steichen, the offensive coordinator of your Philadelphia Eagles, who was kind of the architect of the 6-back attack that had so much success with Jalen Hurts. Obviously, the success did not happen right away. Jalen Hurts needed a season and a half really to progress. Completely understandable. The fact that he's able to do that is big kudos to Jalen. We don't know if Anthony can actually do that himself. But we're going to start just in general, newbies. So the team that was most disappointing in the entire NFL last year, the Indianapolis Colts, with a 4-12-1 record. How are you viewing them to start this year with Richardson under center and Steichen calling the shots? This team is not a 4-win team, correct? They're much better than that. Am I wrong to say that?
I think if you just look at the talent they have on roster, you can't say, oh, this is going to be a bottom feeder. Like while they don't have much star power, they have a lot of just strength up and down. And especially when you're talking about one of your strengths being your defensive line, you're always going to have a shot in the passing league that is the NFL. So I'm kind of with you. While I'm not, crazy bullish on the Colts outlook, I think there is some reason for optimism. How many times have we seen teams come off of huge disappointing seasons? They retool a little bit, and then they're talking about, contending for a division. And again, we said at the top, this is a division that, while the Jaguars might be prohibitive favorites currently, we might think that might just be a little bit of a false favorite as far as, pricing goes. Shane Steichen, I think he helps. Do I think he was the mastermind behind what was happening with the Philadelphia Eagles? No, but he does show success when he has a quarterback that can show off some athleticism, which is what Anthony Richardson is. I have major concerns about Anthony Richardson's, stepping forward in the NFL, and that a lot has to do with that just lack of star power that you're looking at on this team. When you have a young quarterback, what do you want? You want some very reliable wide receivers. One thing that does help him out is another thing that you want is a run game that you can lean on. And this is a team that even if Taylor goes down, they'll continue to try and hammer the rock. And, maybe people think Shane Steichen, he'll get a little pass happy. No, the Eagles, when they were at their best, was when they were running the ball, committing to the run. Now, the Colts don't have the offensive line that the Philadelphia Eagles and Shane Steichen had last season. But, they do have some players up front who should be at least able to give them some looks. And really, the question is, does Taylor stay healthy? Every fantasy football owner, myself included, who ended up with Taylor on their roster are still reeling, and just seeing the picture next to me is like giving me some trigger warning right here. So, it is something and a concern, but that's the concern with all of these teams is, can the stars stay healthy? The only problem with this Colts team is, outside of Richardson, outside of Taylor, where are those stars? And I think that's what kind of worries me about this team is you don't have a guy who you can say prohibitively, this is what our offense goes through outside of Taylor.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with a lot of things you mentioned. Like, just from a team perspective, the Colts have a lot more talent than some of the other teams. They definitely have more talent on paper, at least, of course, than the Tennessee Titans, the Houston Texans. You want to be on the AFC, probably some other teams there. Last year, they had one of the harder schedules in the NFL, and this year they're projected to have one of the easier schedules in the entire NFL. But I'm just straight up, for those who are listening to the other previews, we've kind of been beating around the bush a little bit, kind of not sure where we're going to be looking at to place some bets, and kind of still in the fact-finding process of the NFL offseason. But something that I really am looking at right now is for the Indianapolis Colts to win the AFC South and for Shane Steichen to be the coach of the year in the NFL. I say this for a couple of reasons. For starters, not only is a lot of the progression of Anthony Richardson a huge factor to the Colts' success, but one of the biggest metrics for the coach of the year that people just can't forget is that you have humans just like you and I who have their own biases, their own thoughts, their own concerns about certain things. And when teams or players perform over those expectations, those biases are already eliminated, and teams already start, and those voters already start to think that, that, wow, this person's very heavily exceeded expectations, is to be considered for this award. So normally, based on this award, there is some criteria that a lot of these winners fit. For starters, 14 straight winners have been on the team that's won at least 9 games. The Colts have a win total of 6.5, which I think is low in the first place, considering the division that they're in again and the talent that they have defensively. That 9 should be an achievable number, which would then put Steichen in the race. No winner has had a win total greater than 9.5, so that's meaning, again, that they're not looking at teams that have had expected success that then succeed or even exceed those lofty expectations. They're always looking for coaches that are, on teams that come into the season with low win totals and then overperform. And the average number of wins increased by an average of 6 wins over the year, so that the Colts had 4 last year. I don't know if they get 10. 10's a lot, but it's also not out of the realm of possibility. So, pairing the fact that you have Anthony Richardson, who is a mobile quarterback, who, as we've seen recently, mobile quarterbacks have an easier time adjusting to the NFL in terms of having production early, not necessarily mean if they're going to end up being elite players, but they're able to create off balance. It's easier than to just be a straight up pocket passer. And then also in the back end, they've re-signed Gardner Minshew, who I'm not going to go out and say Gardner Minshew is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, but the fact that they stole Minshew from the Colts, he took him over with him Steichen. They now had a backup quarterback that knows the offense that Steichen wants to run. And if there even are times where Richardson's not good enough to play, or they even have a run packages just with Richardson, they have a capable quarterback that can win them games. So Your expected progression from this defense that was one of the better units not better units, but it was definitely better than they performed last year. You're talking about an offense that finished the year dead last in almost every single metric last season. You can't get worse, right? So 25-1 on Steichen to be the coach of the year, as well as the Colts to win the AFC South. I'm looking at just DraftKings now, and I'm seeing plus 550. I'm sure there are better numbers out there. Those two bets, because as we know in football, there are always teams that, suck the year before, make the playoffs the next year, and teams that, were great the year before, take a big step back the next year. It's like clockwork. We all want to fall in love with these teams that have done well, think they're only going to continue doing well, and vice versa. We know that that's not the case, and I think the Colts are a team that, just from a talent perspective, and now from just being questioned and not knowing exactly what they're going to do, I think that they're a great bet to go over the win total, be in the race to win the AFC South, and Steichen coach of the year. Dan, I know he's riled off a lot of info at you, but thoughts, comments, concerns? Am I crazy, or what, can you play some devil's advocate? What are you seeing from that argument?
No, I mean, that's what the GoldSheet's all about, right? Give the people all the information that they need to make informed wagers. I think when you're talking, it's a buzzword in sports betting, value. We're all looking for value on these plays. I love that Shane Steichen play, because if the Colts do win this division, regardless whether they have, an easier schedule or not, and so much, I completely agree, of having a good year has to do with who you have to play. You can only play the teams you can play. But yeah, definitely an easier schedule. And if the Colts were to win this division after being plus 550, then Shane Steichen automatically puts himself vaulted into that at least top 3 of coach of the year. So, you're talking about 2,500. They start off with 3 wins, something like that, or, maybe even just 2 wins out of the gate. You're probably not going to see a better price than grabbing that right now. And probably the same could be said for around that plus 550, that plus 600. So if you like the Colts, you want to get in on them before the games start being played, I think, because of how this division shakes out. A couple other teams lose, Colts win, then you're not going to be able to get that price. So when you're looking for that all-important value that we talk about so much in sports betting, I would love to play devil's advocate. I think if you're looking for a bet in this division, I can't really advocate the other way, because there's no other bet that I would place in the who will win the AFC South than the Colts as it stands right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point also that you made in terms of, look at the Giants last year. They came out hot, and if you were a Dable coach of the year, that market is a little wonky, so there were still some prices, decent prices available, but you weren't going to be able to get as good of a price as when the season began. And I think that's just a fantastic point. And also with these awards, is you can build a portfolio, right? If you're getting like a 25 now, then you hop in on, so-and-so coach at week 3 after the season started slow. Next thing you know, you could be holding 2 really big plus money tickets with 2 of the finalists at the end of the season, where you're making money regardless of if obviously you're going to lose one of those bets, but if one of those hit. But let's go on to the third team in this division, another team that I think is very interesting as well, and that I personally have no interest in ruling out whatsoever, as the Tennessee Titans. Mike Vrabel, year and year again, has proven that he is one of the best coaches in the NFL, and I say that in terms of motivating his players and doing a lot with less. He's able to take a less talented roster year after year and make them compete at some of the highest levels. For a great example, last year, that game against the Chiefs, they go to overtime and give the Chiefs probably the biggest concern of the entire season and stifle that offense as best as they could. And you're doing it with a cast of defensive players that you probably can name 4 of the 11 starters as a casual fan.
Yeah.
So, talk to me. Tennessee now, their line to win, or their odds to win the AFC South, they're plus 425. Again, we both agree Jacksonville's odds are ridiculously high. I'm in the boat sort of where I would be like, at this, again, shopping price that you could find probably a better price on the Colts and Titans. And boom, you have both of those teams. And now, again, if one of those 2 teams win, you're going to profit regardless. Not saying I'm doing that immediately, but I want to hear from you, Dan. Considering how the Titans roster just isn't that good, but Vrabel is great, and they've shown it again that he can win without the talent. Talk to me. Is this team underrated, or do you think that this is finally a year where it's just like they don't have the smoke? Tannehill's going to be gone. They're going to go to Will Levis. He's not going to be it, and they just can't do anything? Or is this team, again, just kind of being undervalued?
Yeah, and I'm glad you also bring up, the potential of having two nice plus money prices, because you're one of the guys who I look to when I'm talking about future markets. I'm not really a big time future market bettor, just the way that I manage my bankroll. I don't like tying up my money for an entire season. So, yeah, I love, getting a little bit more advice on maybe how to get some of these plus prices so you're trying to be able to lock in a profit. As far as the question goes, are they underrated? I think they're just the Tennessee Titans, right? It's what we see every year. Talk about Coach of the Year candidates. Mike Vrabel won Coach of the Year. It was just 2 years removed that he was able to do it with, again, a roster that doesn't make your eyes pop out of your head. We all know Derrick Henry, and everyone every single season talks about the other shoe is going to have to drop on Henry, right? He had another, X amount of carries, and when you go over that, once a running back reaches a certain age, they drop off the cliff. And he just has continued to be productive year in and year out. So will this be the year? I don't know. But as a betting man, a guy who continues to seem to defy logic, I don't know if I'm going to be fading Derrick Henry anytime soon. But, we talked about star power when we were talking about the Colts. Derrick Henry, that's about it. As you mentioned, you got Ryan Tannehill, you have Will Levis. If Tannehill does go down, were all the other teams right about Will Levis, or did this team potentially get a diamond in the rough? We don't know. I think I would probably lean towards the former, that I think maybe the hype around Levis was a little bit too much heading into the year. But Tannehill is a guy who he's just going to go out there. He's going to manage games. He's not going to make your eyes pop out of your head or anything. So I don't know if I can quite say that they're underrated. I think they're probably justly rated. And the thing that separates this team year in and year out is, to your point, Mike Vrabel's ability to be an ultimate motivator, an ultimate scheme kind of guy, being able to take pieces that maybe wouldn't even crack other rosters and turn them into contending year in and year out for this division. And even think about what he did when he was Coach of the Year, not just defending or, trying for the division, but trying for the entire conference. So as long as Mike Vrabel is the skipper on the team, as long as he's heading them up, I'm never going to count this team out. But I think it's hard to go in, rosy-eyed, bright-eyed, and bushy-tailed about the Tennessee Titans, just because it's the same vibe around this team every single year. It's where are the wins going to come from? Where is the talent going to come from? And then that guy right there somehow finds a way to put together an impressive season that at least has them contending.
Yeah, no, just honestly couldn't agree more all around. It's like, this is the team that by no means am I fading the Tennessee Titans. Does that mean I'm betting them again to win the conference, go over 7.5 wins? No, that's probably accurately priced, but like winning 7, there are coaches in the NFL that could not come close to sniffing 7 wins with this roster. So definitely a testament to Mike Vrabel. My biggest concerns is the offensive line. They still, again, it finds ways to have the team overperform the talent, but not. We'll see how Skronsky, their high draft pick, does. They signed Andre Dillard. They lost Taylor Dewan. We'll see. And they're in the market for DeAndre Hopkins, right? And at this point of his career, it's been pretty obvious that DeAndre Hopkins isn't coveted as like this top tier wide receiver. Obviously, he's has had his moment as a top 5 receiver in the NFL. He's probably asking for that Odell money, and I don't know how Odell got that Odell money, which is ridiculous, as I talked about on the last show. If they add Hopkins, I think it would obviously help, because how could that hurt adding a threat? Because their wide receiver room is, not something you look at. Treylon Burks, Westbrook, Akina, and Phillips, like, mind you could use some firepower there. But yeah, I think just simply put, long story short, I'm not running for the win of the bet the Titans, but I'm certainly not beating Mike Vrabel and the Tennessee Titans. But that leads us to the Houston Texans. And now this is the team, Dan, that I'm actually like, I'm split on how I feel about that. I don't love what they did in the draft to trade back up to get Will Anderson, and now they're devoid of a pick this year because the odds are they're not going to be that good this season. And now they don't even have the draft pick to, recoup the losses from a potentially poor season. But what they did this offseason is, and it could be a positive or a negative. I'm not necessarily, I'm not sure how to feel about it yet. But they signed a ton of veterans. And I'm assuming the goal of signing these veterans was just because their roster was poor last year, that, if you have some guys who have proven success in the NFL, Shaquille Griffin, Bolton Schwartz, Corey Littleton, Sheldon Rankins, Hassan Widgray, Jimmy Ward, Chase Vinovich, Shaq Mason, Robert Woods, a lot of players that, if you're casual, you've probably heard of those players at some point in their career. How good they are at this point is a question to be determined. But do you think that there's any chance that, considering they add all these vets and that maybe if Stroud is good, that this team could be better than advertised, or are we looking at another probable dud season for the Texans?
Yeah, I don't think it could possibly be like the year that they had last year, right? I think alone the fact that, when you head in and you wonder, is this team going to contend, or are they just going to be mailing it in? They wouldn't have went out and inked DeMeco Ryans if they were already viewing this season as a lost cause. He's not the kind of guy who's going to roll over, be a corporate man, and say, all right, yeah, we won't tank, but we won't give out full effort or anything like that. That's not in DeMeco Ryans' DNA. So I think the fact that they found their head coach, presumably of the future, you think what he was able to do defensively with the 49ers, that should at least keep them in games. And at times, it wasn't like they were completely getting boat raced, but you definitely saw a vibe around the team that, hey, let's just make sure that we're able to get one of these top guys, So I just don't think that's going to be happening here again with the staff that they brought in. Again, I'm not like bullish on this roster, but I think that there is some reason to be excited. They were able to, I think that 1-2 punch that they had right at the top of the draft was a great one, which, when you look at what they did in the draft, what they did in the offseason, I think a lot of people are just writing them off and not really giving them credit for those moves that you just said and that you brought in. Sure, are they A-listers anymore? Probably not, but they're guys that if you have a guy like DeMeco Ryans, you get some players to buy in. This isn't going to be a pushover team. And the main thing when you talk about like tanking teams in the NFL, like franchises tank, like players don't tank. Like players aren't out there mailing in games. Players aren't out there saying, I don't want to be out here. Maybe that's not exactly every single player in the NFL, but just by a macro kind of thing, players aren't out there to not earn contract incentives, to not put pride on the line, to not be able to make sure that their next job they're going to be getting paid in. It just doesn't happen. The one thing that does concern me when you're talking about win totals, when you're talking about how this division does outside of the division, they have to go up against the AFC North. And I would be remiss if we didn't mention that in this preview, that all of these teams are going to be having to play an improved Steelers team, a pissed off Ravens team, a Bengals team that again figures to be a top team in the AFC, and then a retooled Browns team as well with Deshaun Watson under center. So those are 4 games for all 4 of these teams that right away I'm going to have some concerns about. So I think my concerns are less about the Texans internally and just about the fact that, it's not like they get to play a division that's struggling as hard as them for their out of, conference or in-conference foe that they have to face this year.
Yeah, no. And I think that it's like looking at it, like they're obviously expecting like CJ Stroud to come in and be the guy. That does not mean that if he's not great first 3 starts that, they're cutting him. Obviously, that's not the case. But one thing I will not disagree with you, but just the devil's advocate with, is the fact that Lovie Smith got a 6-year contract. That kind of tells me that this year, while you made a great point that the players don't tank, the franchise tank, that, well, they don't have the first round pick, which I thought was just like a really crazy kind of way to go about it. Like there's, it's really, you can make a case for this team being better. That case being you have a good offensive line. You have, Nico Collins, John Michie, or some young guys that could be weapons. You have then veterans in Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz. So then you have, again, a decent run game with Damian Pierce, not Devin Singletary. So if CJ Stroud can kind of get the NFL game from the get-go, you have veterans and a good line around him where maybe they could start moving the football and go in that direction and playing well. But considering that DeMeco has a 6-year contract, makes me feel that if this year is another 3-win year, 4-win year, he's obviously not getting fired. The franchise hasn't put him in there for the best spot to succeed, and they're not going to let a one-and-done go on a 6-year deal. So that's just a little thing to food for thought, is that while I 100% agree that these players are going to go out and bust their ass every single snap, every single day, unless there is some turmoil within the locker room, which you can't really quantify right now, but they're not tanking. So again, the devil's advocate for the Texans being good is, like I said, they have a good line and they have some veterans that can maybe elevate Stroud. Their defense, again, they added just a bunch of players, and if Will Anderson really is this elite pass rusher, never having an elite pass rusher definitely can change a game, but 6.5 wins seems rich to me, and initial thoughts would certainly be under there.
Yeah, I was surprised. I think probably you line this around 5.5, and that's being optimistic. I think there's no way, even at plus 110, that you could probably talk me into going over that 6.5. I think that's right around. I was surprised to see an extra point above what I would probably project them around that 5 and 6 wins. So you couldn't make me bet that with your money, Eric. I'm staying away from any win total here for the Texans, and I don't know if, while I'm excited for D'Amico Ryans and this roster and the potential that they have moving down here, I don't think I'm tying up any money on any futures to be winning the division or the conference with the Texans. Unfortunately,
definitely not. I would consider both the Titans and the Colts for the division 100%. But definitely not touched in this scenario. But Dan, this was an absolute pleasure. Tell everybody where they can find some of the lacrosse things and other content you've been doing.
Yeah, always just hit me on Twitter at NewbieTalks, NEUBYTALKS. That has everything we're doing. We got cash considerations that'll be ramping up with my man Dave Sherapan as we head closer to NFL season. So follow me on Twitter. You find all of that there. And if you need some lacrosse winners, I'm always just a DM away. That's the way to do it there. So Eric, appreciate you having me on, man. I'm always just a text away when we need to talk some football here on the Gold Sheet.
Dan will be back. Certainly make sure you check out his lacrosse picks. Dog Days of Summer. You got Gold Sheet for baseball. You got Dan for lacrosse. Remind everybody again that all 3 Gold Sheet products, Gold Sheet, Confidential Kickoff, and Extra, are it's $149 one price only until July 16th, this early bird. Then that price is going to jump back up. And again, those who were familiar with the LTS pick service, the exact same service is going to be hosted at WagerTalk.com. WT.buzz/GS is where you can find the Gold Sheet specifically, but that is the same service, just on WagerTalk, not on GoldSheet.com. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe to the video and check out the other previews we've done. And we'll see you guys with another preview on Thursday. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.